and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb.
Does this mean that the first, what she read, that what Jesus is saying there, that John the Baptist was already, he had already been beheaded?
Yes, this is kind of, this section right here is almost like a flashback.
Yeah.
Like you hear first about, okay, so Jesus is now known, and the king is thinking to himself, is this John the Baptist raised from the dead? And then of course, he's also asking himself, is this Elijah? Or is this one of the, like, someone like the prophets of old? So he doesn't know who Jesus is, but he knows that there's, that this is a concern for him. And then it tells the story about what happened to John the Baptist. So as you're listening to that, is there anything else that catches your attention about that?
Well, one thing, John, the king, he didn't want to do it, but he couldn't get out of it, really.
Yeah.
Because of the people and what he had told her. And the mother was the one that really wanted it.
Yeah. You know, it took me a little bit to kind of get a good grasp of what was going on with this family.
Right.
And I can tell you it's kind of, it's complex. And it's very political, so you don't mind me getting a little political here. I can show you kind of what was going on if you're interested on the map. So we have the family of Herod. Of course, he was king over all of Israel when it was a province of Rome. Now, his family had actually, he came from a descendant line of Jewish high priests who had valiantly fought off the former rulers and established Israel as an independent kingdom for about a century. Then the Romans came and they just kind of let the Romans take over because of political needs and desires. So that family, of course, had Herod the Great as the father, who was very concerned about the birth of a Messiah. Well, he also was very concerned about power and kept thinking that people were going to try to kill him, so he built Masada, this fortress palace, in the mountains on the south side, if he ever had to make a last-minute stand. And he ended up killing off a number of his sons in order to preserve his power. So let's see, here's the coast. We have that Dead Sea there, and the Sea of Galilee. So we have what King Herod ruled was basically this area right in here. So it was a pretty large territory, right? I mean, that's a large piece of Israel that got united there. That land got divided up between his sons. One of his sons actually got most of this, and that was Archelaus. And Antipater got Galilee and Petra right here. And his other son, Philip, got this piece of the cake. So what happens here is that he has Herodes is also part of that family. She was born and she's part of that bloodline. I think she's She's like a granddaughter to King Herod the Great. And she ends up marrying King Philip, whose kingdom is here, or this area. He's a tetrarch, technically. Basically a ruler over Providence. And so she's married to the patriarch, who is her half-uncle. And some reason something happens there, and there's a falling out, and she gets a divorce. And so she ends up marrying Philip's brother, Antipatus, Herod Antipatus. And Antipatus has to actually get a divorce from his wife, who apparently has some major connections down here, politically speaking, and so there's a divorce. So divorce and a divorce, and we have this situation. So, and of course, John the Baptist has pointed out that none of this is scriptural or biblical based. You go back to the Old Testament, and they're just kind of impeding and doing what they want without following the scriptures. Well, whenever you say that to someone that has power and authority, that gets you in trouble. And so he got arrested, and that's how he ended up in prison. And Herodotus didn't like him because John the Baptist pointed out what she did. And so when a convenient moment arose, Herodias has John the Baptist beheaded. And it appears that what worked was that Antipatus was throwing a big banquet. He was getting drunk, and something caught his attention with how his stepdaughter danced. It seems like it was very seductive, at least in some way. And he promised her half of his kingdom, which he really didn't have the right to do. And he felt like he had to follow through with it after making such a bold statement in front of his guest.
He had 3 sons, right?
All
right.
King Herod the Great had, I believe, 3 sons that ended up becoming rulers.
Right.
He had several more sons who also died because he put them to death.
Right.
So, now, what caught my attention is that this story I told you of this banquet is compared or contrasted to what we're about to read in verse 30. Can I have someone read verse 30 through 43?
I can read it. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that it can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than a half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000.
There's 12 again.
Yeah, you caught it right there. Yeah, so what pops out to you in the story?
They fed him with the fish and the bread, and he had all that left, and he fed all those people. But that's what God did when they were coming over from Egypt. Look what they did, what he did.
Yes, you're right. And there are several things to note here is that the people, the Israelite people remembered when the Hebrews were fed in the wilderness. They remember that. And this story reminds them of that story of the manna. They remember this, and this catches their attention because they realize that Jesus just fed 5,000 people without really any resources at all, and it turned into not just enough, but a bountiful amount that was a complete amount, with being full baskets full.
But in this, when they left, and they wanted to go to a solitary place. Evidently, some of them had done heard, because he wanted to go by himself, but they had done heard that so many people showed up there. That's where what he said before, he didn't want to publicize himself too much, you know, like he said, the crowds and all, but they ended up coming out there.
Yeah. Well, let's imagine a story here in a situation. You've all been out working for Christ United Methodist Church, doing mission work, divided up into teams, and you've been out for like a week, faithfully helping the church and spreading the news of Jesus, and you're tired, right? You want a break. And we're like, okay, well, let's go to the solitary place. Let's go to Shipwreck Farm and just kind of relax for a bit. And suddenly, we go to the other side of the river, and we have everybody and their uncle from Shenandoah and Elkton over there wanting us to talk to them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the disciples were feeling. And bless you. They were tired, they were ready for a break, and they needed a break, and suddenly everybody's out there. And this is a good amount of people because, this is more people than were in even the larger towns in Galilee. So they were coming to see Jesus. And they were willing to go to desolate places to go see him.
Yeah, it said it was in a desolate place. That's why they couldn't go out and get any. Wasn't close enough to get any food or anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so people who realize that Jesus is a big deal, and they're coming out to meet him, and Jesus not only teaches them, but he provides them food. And that's what catches people's attention. And so this feast, though, is very different from the feast we've just read about, because the feast before Herod's feast, there was drunkenness, there was all kinds of, his stepdaughter was doing seductive dancing, and there ended up being a death of a prophet of God. In this meal, people have received the teachings of the Word, that they have received comfort and have been filled with their daily bread. And there are 12 basketfuls representing the tribes of Israel.
That's what had to get you, because like you said, no more than they had out there. And at the end I read there, it said it was 5,000 that had eaten.
Mm-hmm.
So where did it all come from?
Yeah.
It said 5,000 men, what about the women and the
Yeah.
children?
Yeah.
They fed too.
I thought that's what it said men.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's a lot of people. So we can see that Jesus continues his ministry of bringing transformation, and we're going to find out more about that next week as we'll see how he continues to share that with others.
How many do you think was actually there?